Welcome back, Weirds and Weebies, to the channel that you can do. So today, I'm covering Overwatch Season 9, and the reason why is because, well, besides I usually do this kind of thing, this season has really flipped the game on its head. Now, most of you already know I'm late to the punch, I know, but for those of you who are a bit more out of the loop, Season 9 has been a widely anticipated season. The season we just had, Season 8, despite adding a new character, has been probably the worst received season of Overwatch 2 so far. And so as a result, a lot of people were desperate to get out of it and move on to the next one. Beyond that, a lot of people were excited for Season 9 because it was the season where they were finally going to rework the rank system, which of course no one really liked in Overwatch 2. Now, while many others cared a lot, I don't really care about the ranked rework. As you know, I don't really play ranked, I'm a quick play warrior. And I probably won't ever play ranked unless they can fix all these crashes that I've been experiencing ever since Season 6, because I don't know if that's just me, but I'm still experiencing random crashes every day. Usually at some point the game will crash and kick me out of it, and you know, I don't want to be that guy who screws over his entire team once every day or whatever because I'm winning and then suddenly I get kicked from the game because I crashed. So as a result, I don't see myself ever really playing competitive unless that gets fixed, and considering that's an issue that started 3 seasons ago and hasn't been fixed yet for me, I'm gonna go out on a limb and guess that's an issue I'm gonna be having for the rest of time. Either way, as a result, those changes don't really matter to me, although to most other people I guess it's a big deal. Why I still want to talk about this season though is because what is a big deal is the other thing that's been happening this season. This season's balance patch is probably the single biggest, most game-shattering balance patch that Overwatch has ever received. It really flips the game on its head. And, you know, a lot of people are obviously going to be quick to complain or roll their eyes or go, oh, look at the idiot devs at it again, making all these wild and wacky changes without thinking first. But I'm not gonna lie, I think they thought this one through. And considering how negative I've been recently about balance in the game, hopefully you can see I'm being very sincere when I say that. The main reason why I've been getting so pissed with the balance recently isn't even because, oh god, they're doing a shit job of balancing the game, because it's always way easier to say that than to actually sit down and balance a game as complicated as Overwatch. And I don't know if you were around for this, but a lot of my earlier videos towards the start of Overwatch 2, I was very defensive of the devs balancing, and I said they were actually doing quite a good job. And I genuinely believe they were overall doing a good job, and people were complaining way too much the first 3 or 4 seasons of the game. But I mentioned before in previous videos, but ever since Season 6 onwards, and honestly, probably Season 5, I didn't play in Season 5, but looking at the changes, they didn't look very good in Season 5. I really feel like they just switched their brains off and stopped paying any attention to the balancing they're doing. And the main thing that frustrated me wasn't even, oh, the balance is bad, but like, I didn't even understand the vast majority of their decisions, how it even theoretically could have been a good decision. Almost every single time they made a change, I'm looking at it, I'm like, okay, so not only do I disagree with this change, but I don't even know by what backwards-ass logic you arrived at the conclusion this would be a good change. And so I'm kind of just inclined to believe you didn't really think about it. You just saw this character's got a low win rate or a higher win rate. Let's just increase this number. Surely that will help, question mark, question mark, question mark. Especially because a lot of the changes aren't even necessarily that they weren't giving characters the right help or whatever, but usually that they would give characters that needed help. But the way that they would give them help would be ways which just further exacerbated already existing issues in the game that were less to do with balance and more to do with how simply unfun the game had become. A perfect example, of course, would be Lifeweaver, who released stupidly underpowered, and so, because they didn't really have a solution to that, their answer was just to make him stupidly survivable. And hey, you know what? Technically, from a pure balance perspective, that was, big air quotes, correct, because he was really underperforming. But that's a good example, because by making Lifeweaver super survivable, they didn't really make anyone happy. They made Lifeweaver easier to play, and they made it less punishing when you get caught out on Lifeweaver, and so they probably improved his win rates when he was a struggling character, which on paper is fine. But in reality, what that leads to is more games when no one dies, regardless of how good the enemy or your team is. because until the Life Weaver dies, no one dies, and now we just gave Life Weaver like 50 health bars. Yeah, just as an example of a change which, yeah, maybe pure balance-wise makes sense, but from a pure making the game fun perspective, makes no sense. Anyway, these Season 9 changes, I feel like, is the first time in a good long while that I've actually sat down and said, okay, I don't agree with literally everything you've done here, but I fully believe that you actually thought these changes through before you sent them in, and certainly that's a big relief for me. So, what'd they do? Well, obviously there's some other miscellaneous balance changes, but really, I'm not going to sit here and read the entire patch, because 90% of the changes in this patch are actually global changes, and most of the other changes are extremely small and practically irrelevant. So unless it is relevant, then I might bring it up. I'm mostly just going to focus on these global changes. There may only be 3 of them, but all 3 of them are absolutely groundbreaking for the game in terms of their impact. Now, we do have a bit of a bad tendency to be a bit doomer in this community, so how about we start from the bottom and work our way up to the top here. I'm going to start with the global change, which I think is the most sussy, shall we say, and work my way up to the one that I want to spend the most time praising. So the global change which I was the most suspicious of was increasing the hitbox size of every single bullet in the game, with only 1 or 2 exceptions, like Sombra Virus and Sigma Rock. That's right, if you haven't played recently, if you go on and play now, everyone in the game has bigger bullets, where essentially you can shoot the thin air next to someone's head, but so long as you're close enough to their head, the game will say, yeah, close enough, and give you the headshot.
Wait, why the fuck do I have 400 ping? Oh, whatever. I've got to make this video sooner or later. Well, that's going to take some getting used to.
When I'm hitting my shots, you can't touch me.
True.
And obviously a lot of people instantly hear this and think it sounds bad. And I'm not saying that to, you know, poo-poo those people, because to be honest, I'm one of them. Like, when I first heard that, I thought, yeah, that sounds pretty bad. Especially because I have noticed a bit of a trend in Overwatch 2's balancing, where they seem to more and more punish characters that are allowed to really do a lot to express their skill, because it causes a lot of variance in like how effective they are. Some of these especially high skill characters can do awful if you don't do that great on them, but then do stupidly good if you do amazing on them. And of course that variance makes them hard to balance, and so sometimes I worry that Blizzard's solution to balancing high skill characters, rather than actually trying to balance them, is to say, well, how about we just make it so they can only do skillful things when they have a cooldown? Then that puts a limit on how many times they can do something cool or skillful, and that makes it easier to balance. But that also means that your skill matters less. And of course, considering that was a pattern I've been seeing recently with the balance of this game, I was very, very wary of the idea of making it so it took less aim to hit everyone in the game. However, I thought about it a little bit, and I thought to myself, actually, maybe this isn't such a bad idea. Especially because Overwatch really does have some problems with hitting shots. Like, don't get me wrong, you can always just get better at the game, but let's be real. The kind of aim skill to consistently hit shots in Overwatch is a little bit fucking ludicrous. I think the big thing is, like, I'm not even going to say, oh, Overwatch is the hardest FPS out there. I don't play enough FPSs to really make a statement like that. But I think the big thing is that when you learn to aim on a character on Overwatch, you can't just learn it once. Half the characters in the game kind of force you to relearn how to aim in different ways. Because the thing is that when you're aiming, even if you're using a hit scan, at least to some extent, you're always going to be telling your brain to shoot where they're going to be rather than where they are. Characters in this game are always going to be moving, they're never going to make the shot easy for you, and because they're always going to be moving, you're simply literally not going to be physically capable of thinking fast enough to move your crosshair over to their head, wait for your brain to be like, yep, I see the image, I see the dot is on the head, and I'm telling you, yes, you should click now, and then actually fire and have them not move out of the way in that time. It never ever actually happens, and so as a result, obviously that means that even when you're using a hit scan, although obviously to a much lesser extent than a projectile, you have to do some kind of predicting of where people are going to move. And while that's maybe not such a big problem if they're just playing a character like Ana or Zen, if they're playing a character like, I don't know, Lucio or Mercy, that might get a little bit more difficult. You start having to learn the arc trajectories of Guardian Angel or the arc trajectories of Lucio's wall ride to be able to land consistent shots. And then even more characters start popping into frame. You start having to memorize how far a Tracer blink goes so that when you hear Tracer use blink, you can predict which direction they probably blinked in and turn around to be ready to aim there, with an idea of where the Tracer is going to be before you've even seen them there, at least if you want to land your shots. And while to some extent I like all this skill expression, it is kind of true that when you also factor in people just mashing keys and 80-80 strafing for the sake of making themselves harder to hit, at that point it's not really all skill, there's a little bit of luck involved on top of all the skill required. Because at the end of the day, I could perfectly predict the exact trajectory a Lucio wall ride would have at a certain position, and then try and line up my shot to shoot him when his head appears at a very specific spot, which I expect it to. But then if the Lucio, just wary of being shot, decides to randomly spam just before I'm about to land my shot, there's a chance that maybe I miss. And I mean, it is to the point where even the best players in this game aren't landing every single shot. They're getting close to it on some hit scans, but, you know, they don't literally never miss. And so as a result, while I was worried this would be a change that would make it so that high skill players would be punished and low skill players would be rewarded, it seems like a change that relatively evenly affects all skill levels. Because even high skill players, as I say, were still not landing every single one of their shots, so now both high skill and low skill players hit more shots. And in fairness, I did feel like occasionally I would get into games of Overwatch where it was just kind of boring, because people were forced into a situation where so many sightlines were being denied by cooldowns or threats of something happening the second they peaked, that people would spend half the game just shooting at thin air generally in the direction of the enemies, not even because they couldn't aim, but because if they wanted to take an angle where they could actually get a good shot, they'd just get their head blown off in 0.5 seconds. And so everyone instead just scared, like, peeks out of corners, shoots at thin air, oh, hide again, peek out, shoot at thin air. And obviously, sometimes it really does feel like every now and then, when you get into these games that are a little bit more stalematey, that, like, Jesus, you spend more of the game, like, seeing shots being fired at thin air than actually people shooting each other. So overall, I must admit I was very wary of this change at first, but now that I've come on to play it, I think overall I'm warming up to it. I'm not fully on board with it all the way. There are some certain situations where I think this is a little bit ridiculous. First of all, Pharah's projectiles were already pretty big, and now they're fucking humongous. Not to mention, Pharah got reworked this patch as well, though we'll get to that later. The degree to which I can miss my explosives and still get a direct hit on this Tracer is kind of fucking ludicrous, and despite the fact that Pharah is my least played character, I've been playing her because she got reworked recently, and genuinely I have been hitting non-stop direct hits all the time. So I think Pharah might be a little bit ridiculous. And the other one is Widowmaker, because even her shots got bigger, and that's a little bit scary considering that, well, she can still one-shot. So, yeah. I was going to try the new Widowmaker, and I'm not going to lie, because Widowmaker is another one of the characters I'm not very good at typically, since I'm not really an aim guy. I was very nervous to try it, and so I only ended up doing one game on Widowmaker so far. And that one game I instantly had to swap off, because there was an enemy at Widowmaker who was just rolling the entire lobby, and to be quite frank, I definitely wasn't going to skill diff them. But why am I bringing this up? Well, because it's actually so bad now that literally 2 of my deaths to this Widow were actually in situations where I was not even visible on their screen, even on the kill cam when they killed me. What do I mean by this? I got stuck in a situation where I peeked them, tried to get a shot on them, just barely missed, and then obviously ducked into cover before they headshot me. But because they know where I am, because, you know, they saw me duck into cover, they would just aim just above the box I was hiding behind, and even though my head literally isn't even there, because the bullet hitbox is bigger, they could just fire at the thin air above the box and still hit my head. And so literally I got headshot twice while I was not even a single pixel of me was visible on their screen. That's gonna take some getting fucking used to, Jesus Christ. But yeah, all things said, at the very least, I do think this change is generally good. Not only because it just makes it feel like things are happening a bit more, you don't have these annoying stalemate situations where you're just shooting at thin air, because if you actually took the time to get a good angle and go for a good shot, you'd just get destroyed. But on top of that, it also reduces situations where characters like Kiriko can just run into your face, 80-80 strafe, jump on your head, and just like flail kunais everywhere and see if they win the lottery and get the 2-tap on you. I mean, like, Again, as always, there's some skill there, but especially on Kiriko specifically, Kiriko doesn't actually really have like flashy movement. She just has 80-80 strafes like everyone else, but hers are just especially deadly because she's got the smaller tip box in the game. And so obviously it's really annoying when a Kiriko gets in your face because it's not even really a question of predicting their movements, because they're just mashing random movement keys on purpose so that you can't predict their movements. So it really does just feel like, oh, a Kiriko is in my face. It's time for me to roll the dice and see if I can shoot her or if she gets the 2-tap on me first. So yeah, having bigger bullets means that's a much less common situation, and certainly I think Kiriko is nowhere near as oppressive right now, which is good in my book. As well as that, I must admit, one last thing about this change I do like is, and I understand I'm going to be a little bit biased here, but I do have to say, while I understand Overwatch intentionally has a wide appeal with a bunch of characters of very different playstyles all in one game, I have always thought that Overwatch should lean into the fact it's not a traditional FPS, and I always thought that it should put more emphasis on the MOBA elements and the strategic elements of the game over the pure FPS mechanical aim stuff. And so I guess I am quite a fan of making it so simply landing shots isn't as difficult, so that people who aren't just crazy aimbots can play some of the more aim-intensive characters like Widow. I mean, look, I know there are some people who play this game who just play it because they like landing shots on Widow or like Cass or whatever, but let's be real, like, there's 50 other first-person shooters you could be playing if you just want to play a character that shoots a gun. I'm pretty sure the vast majority of people that Overwatch really appeals to aren't the kind of people who only care about the aim mechanics of the game. And considering it's the big thing the game has to be unique, I'm really glad they are leaning into that. With that said, that's just the first of the 3 enormous changes. Change number 2 is one that I generally think will do a lot of good for the game, but I won't lie, also concerns me a little. Though I have to admit, the more I've thought about it and the more I've played with it, I'm warming up to it. And it's a change that a lot of people might have an instant negative opinion on, because it really does, once again, sound very bad. And that is, they decided to increase the health of every single character in the entire game. Now, I'm not going to sit here and list every single health change, but essentially everyone got 15 to 25% more health. If you're a 200 HP character, you now have 250 HP. I'm not going to get into more details than that. You can kind of figure out the rest. So this might seem like a very strange change at first, because a lot of people who maybe play the game more casually would have probably thought that the problem with this game was people not fucking dying, especially if you're dealing with Orissas and all that. But the thing is, that's only one half of the problem. Once you get out of the lower ranks, it's also a problem that while people sometimes never die, they simultaneously, when they don't never die, instantly die. Like, it's either you poke your head out and you get your head blown off in less than 1/10 of a second and you didn't even get to play the video game, or you literally are unkillable and you can just stand there and tank a million shots and no one cares. And these seem like contradictory problems to have at the same time, but they aren't. And the reason why is because it's all essentially caused by healing power creep. And healing power creep in turn causes damage power creep to cut through the healing. But then when damage power creep gets too out of hand, we get healing power creep. When healing power creep gets too out of hand, we get damage power creep. And we get this vicious cycle where damage and healing both keep going up in the game to counteract each other. And now it's culminated in one of the biggest, most overarching problems with Overwatch 2's gameplay. The fact that healing simply outpaces damage means that if you're trying to kill someone and they're getting healed, it's not just harder, it's borderline impossible unless you can find some kind of way to prevent that character from getting healed. Now, the answer to this used to be, okay, well, there is a way to prevent that character from getting healed. Kill the support, right? Well, here's the thing. I mean, we've kind of made the decision now, unfortunately, or at least it seems the devs have taken the stance that they don't want to make it so supports can be killed. They want supports to have a bunch of buttons they can press for free to just instantly live. They want BAP to have Lamp and Regen Burst. They want Lifeweaver to have 225 HP, a dash that comes back every 5 seconds that also self-heals him, and a platform that not only gets him out of danger instantly, but also acts as a 400 HP shield, all of which can be activated at the press of a button. And I'm not saying that supports shouldn't have survivability, but I am saying that I feel like supports should have survivability that takes skill. Ergo, Lucio wall riding is perfectly fine supports survivability, because it's an escape tool that takes an immense amount of skill to master. However, a support tool like BAP's Regen Burst or Lamp is just press a button and now I don't die. Or Kirisuzu, you get the point. not very good mechanics in my opinion. And unfortunately, for as much as I wish they would simply fix that issue and make it so supports are killable again, I don't see that happening. It seems like they're really locked in on making support very casual friendly. Even as someone who plays support more than literally any other role, I unfortunately do think the devs are dead set on making support as casual and inviting as possible. And that sounds nice at first, but as I say, the consequences of it are quite dire, because it means supports have to be basically unkillable so that newer players don't feel scared off of the role. But also because healing outpaces damage and people are unkillable until you kill the support, but now they're making the supports unkillable, that means the supports have to have low impact outside of just healing. You might not realize that because you have all the survivability tools, you now aren't allowed to do a whole bunch of other things that would actually let you have a bit more say in the game other than simply holding left click or right click on your tank to keep them alive. Either way, since killing the support's kind of off the table ever since Season 6, unless you get really lucky or they just don't have cooldowns, but that's more about them having a button or not than you being good at the game. Essentially, I'm surprised I haven't seen anyone mention this so far. I feel like someone must have and I just missed it or something, but I really do think that the entire meta of the game has essentially just been figuring out how to kill someone despite the fact that they are going to get healed, by essentially picking characters that say, well, fuck your healing, I'm going to kill you anyway. That's why Ana's been consistently meta, but beyond that, on the DPS role, which two DPS have been extremely dominant for an extremely long time recently? Two that come to mind for me straight away are Sojourn and Mei. Sojourn because with Railgun you can burst kill someone after only doing a little bit of poke damage before they can even get healed, and Mei because you can wall tanks off from their supports and kill them while they don't have any healing. I don't think it's a coincidence that the characters that consistently seem to become meta in the DPS role are basically always the DPS that have the most ability to kill someone despite healers being present. Hell, I think it's a reason why I don't hear a lot of people talk about this, but while Junkrat hasn't exactly ever been hard meta, Junkrat used to be a kind of joke character almost in Overwatch 1, at least at higher levels like play for more skillful players. He was basically just a noob stomper. But in Overwatch 2, if you're good at Junkrat, honestly, he's been a pretty consistently strong DPS because he can burst kill, and that means people can't get healed. So while it might seem a bit strange adding more health to every character, it kind of does solve the problem a little bit. You see, what I wanted them to do was a little different. What I, and I think many other people wanted, was for them to bring the damage and healing numbers down because they had gone way too high. But their response instead was to say, okay, we're not going to do that, but instead we're going to give everyone more health. And that kind of does the same thing, kind of. Because if they have more health, it takes more damage to kill them, so while the damage numbers technically haven't changed, the same amount of damage is less valuable in this patch than it was last patch. And so effectively, damage has been reduced, sort of. Same goes for healing, it takes more healing to full heal someone. Side note, they also did compensate for ult charge. All ults in the game are 10% more expensive. Honestly, you probably still get more ult charge in this meta, even with that, like, added on top than you did last time, but yeah, that's also been changed, just in case you were going to point that out. By giving everyone more health, they're making it more difficult to burst kill. In fact, Widowmaker is the only DPS in the game who still has a one-shot kill. Both Junkrat and Hanzo lost their one-shot combos, and I know that not everyone's going to be on the same page here, but I personally celebrate that. I think that's really, really cool. However, there are obvious downsides to this. One of them, for example, maybe being, I mean, we were just talking about how unkillable supports are, and, well, we just gave every single support in the game an extra 50 health. That doesn't sound very good. But hopefully, of course, the bigger bullets will also help compensate for that, because more people are going to be landing more shots. I must admit, when I first heard this change, I was happy in some ways because I could see the logic, and it felt like the first time they were really addressing this problem they've been ignoring and letting ruin the game for half a year now, and they were finally going to do something about this damage and healing power creep. I was just a little bit wary that, again, I didn't think this was the perfect way to do it. And the main reason I was worried about them increasing health was it seemed like then their solution to power creep was just to introduce different power creep to fix the old power creep with new power creep. You know, instead of power creeping damage and heals, now they're just going to power creep health to undo the power creep they did with damage and heals. But then what happens when the health power creep creates problems? Well, then are they going to have to invent a new kind of power creep to deal with the health power creep? You know, it sounds like it's going to be a vicious cycle. However, obviously, there's an implication there that something bad will happen because we increased everyone's health. But honestly, I was kind of surprised. I thought when these patch notes were first leaked, I forgot to mention that, they were leaked before the patch actually dropped. and I almost made a video on it, but honestly, I just didn't have as much to say at the time because it was so hard to imagine what the game would even be like without playing it with all the changes. But either way, when the patch notes leaked, I remember sitting down and having a good think, and expecting that I'd be able to think of loads of examples of characters who getting more health either would screw them or help them way too much. And aside from just generally, supports are going to be obviously even more survivable, which I'm not a big fan of. I was actually pleasantly surprised to see that I could not think of many characters. Junkrat would get screwed because he can't one-shot combo anymore, and he kinda needed to be able to do that to be good. So, yeah, predictably, if you didn't know, Junkrat is dead this season. At least, well, I say that, Junkrat is one of my least played characters, but that's what I hear everyone else saying, and I mean, from what I've seen, it seems to be the way things are panning out. But I thought I could easily think of so many other characters that would get screwed by everyone having more health, but really Junkrat was the only one that came to mind. Pharah too, I guess, because Pharah has the same damage breakpoints as Junkrat, but Pharah also is getting a rework that made her way stronger in this update, and also even if Pharah didn't get that rework this update, she'd still at least have the niche of being able to just sit in the sky all game with a mercy pocket and bully the tank, and unless there's a good hit scan on the enemy team, just win the game for free by picking her, regardless of whether she can burst kill or not. But eventually I came to one which I thought initially was a serious concern, that being the dive DPS. Sombra, Genji, and Tracer. I thought that these characters would be in the dumps after the health change, because obviously these characters don't care that much about having more health, but you know what they really do care about? Getting in and getting a kill quick so they can get out before they get hunted down and killed, considering they're almost always infiltrating enemy space in the map and putting themselves in immense danger to go for risky kills on the back line. And when you already factor in that the main problem with these characters is they were struggling to kill supports, considering how unkillable they are and how low their damage is for a DPS, yeah, it doesn't exactly sound like a great sell to be like, oh yeah, you're going to have more health than a character that doesn't care about health, and the people you're trying to kill are going to have more health. That obviously would be really bad for the game as well, because, well, I mean, let's just be real, dive characters in general are the highest skill characters in the game and also the most fun characters in the game to play generally, and so any time that dive is in the dumpster and you can't really play Genji or Tracer or Sombra even if you're good at them, that's not a good time to be playing the game really. But even then, I realized before the update dropped that there were a couple things I overlooked. At first I thought that I'd finally found it, that was the big problem. But I then started to realize they actually had some things going for them. Sure, the increased health was definitely a massive hit to the effectiveness of dive DPS, and the bigger bullets as well was going to make them easier to shoot when the main way they stay alive is being really slippery and hard to shoot. However, while they have those two big negatives going against them, they also have two big positives that I didn't really think about before. One of them being that the bigger projectiles change is actually a double-edged sword, and I mean that in a good way for once. Because, yeah, it's got the bad side of being shot more easily, but also, most dive DPS, I say most, literally all of them, utilize high spread weapons that can't shoot straight. And the reason for that is obviously to make it so you have to get close to do maximum damage. And if the hitbox of your spraying weapons that don't shoot in a straight line are going to be larger per bullet, that means that now you can still do maximum damage as a Tracer, Sombra, or Genji from a further away range than before. Don't get me wrong, it's still pretty close range, but certainly I have actually already died more than a couple times in situations where I'm too used to the old ranges, and I'll be fighting a Genji or whatever at a range at which I know they can't triple shuriken me if I'm playing normal Overwatch, but I forget it's Season 9, and I get triple shuriken despite the fact there's a good Tracer blink between me and this Genji, and he actually finishes me off, and I'm like, oh shit, I did not think that would work from that distance. So that little extra bit of range is really going to help out their damage output. The other benefit though is the third change I haven't mentioned yet, and I think the dive DPS benefit heavily from this change. And this change is the biggest thing I want to praise this update. The final game-breaking change they have introduced this patch that I think is genuinely one of the best things that's ever been added to the game. It's something that might sound insignificant at first, but I really think is going to turn things on their head. Well, I say that as if it hasn't already happened. It has. The DPS role finally got a passive, and this time one which I think will actually stick. Quick history for those of you who missed it. At the start of Overwatch 2, they gave every role a passive, and The ones for support and tank stuck pretty immediately. Support, of course, got the health regeneration passive while out of combat, which I completely forgot to mention. The whole big hubbub about this season before was that everyone was getting that health regeneration passive, which also happened. That's just not listed as one of my big 3 changes because, believe it or not, it actually didn't change a whole lot, considering that for everyone else, they have to wait 5 whole seconds to start regenerating health, and for supports, they only have to wait 2.5 seconds. Which, by the way, before it was 2 seconds, so even for supports, it technically got nerfed. But either way, the support passive was health regeneration, and that stuck pretty immediately. The tank passive, some people have qualms with, but overall stuck also pretty immediately, that being that tanks grant 30% less ult charge for being damaged or healed because they're bigger, easier targets, and also that they take 30% less knockback. The only problem people really have with this one, for the most part, is that obviously Lucios don't really like that they can't boop kill half the roster anymore because, you know, you might be surprised, but that 30% really makes boop useless against tanks. However, since day one, the DPS passive has really posed an issue. In the very first beta of Overwatch 2, which I played in, the DPS passive was to give all DPS 10% extra movement speed at all times. And I think this was the best passive they actually went with, was the first one they tried, but unfortunately it was also the one they removed the quickest. DPS moving 10% faster made it so that supports could not outrun them when they were being chased, and that meant that supports got hunted down like wild animals in the first beta. It's really hard to believe, considering that aside from that first beta and maybe Season 1, for the rest of Overwatch 2's life, support has been an absolute dominating monster, but in the very first betas, support actually was constantly being hunted down and it was very hard to stay alive on it. That being said, I actually think this passive could have worked. I think that support genuinely only needed small buffs, and honestly, in hindsight, even as someone who back in the day when this first beta came out thought support needed some help, I would even go as far as to say, you know what, I've gone back on it. I do think that it was a little bit of just a skill issue. I do think it was a little bit, don't get me wrong, it was rough, and support did need some help. But I do think that it was mostly just the game got harder and supports didn't deal well with it, and since we've kind of been babied a bit, which is a bit of a shame obviously because I think the game's gone in a bad direction as a result. But either way, while I think it would have been a nice world to exist in the world where the DPS kept that passive and support simply got some small buffs to help them deal with being dived by DPS that could outrun them, it wasn't meant to be. In the second beta they tried something similar but a little bit different, where instead, once you got an elimination, for the next couple seconds, you would have a larger speed boost, but one that would go away after a couple seconds and would only trigger upon getting an elimination. This one was also scrapped. In fact, it kind of did a lot worse than the last one, because there were a lot of characters who simply just didn't get much benefit from this passive. It was mostly the dive DPS that got a lot of benefit out of it, but if you were playing a sniper character, not only did you not really care about the movement speed, but it actually actively threw off your aim when you got a sudden movement speed boost as soon as you got a kill. And so after the second beta, they stuck on what the DPS passive has been stuck at for the rest of Overwatch 2's life up until Season 9. That being that after receiving an elimination, you reload, I think it's 25% faster for the next couple seconds. And I say I think because everyone forgets this passive exists and no one really cares about it. It essentially only really stuck because it was the only one that didn't cause an issue, but it didn't really do anything for DPS either. Basically, the only DPS in the game who cared about this was Ashe because he has a really long reload, but everyone else in Overwatch, because the game is so fast-paced, has reloads that very rarely exceed 1 second long anyway, and so as a result, increased reload speed only upon getting a kill that isn't even that much faster isn't really a big benefit. Not to mention, Hanzo doesn't even reload, so Hanzo just got nothing. But enough with the fanfare, what is it now? Well, believe it or not, they've finally found one, and not just like a replacement that is different from the last one and maybe a bit flashier. I really think this is the best DPS passive they could have possibly added. This is a dream mechanic that I was asking for since July, and I genuinely thought that while I thought it would be one of the best things it could add to the game, I thought they would never have the balls to do it. And so obviously I'm very excited about this passive. And that is that the DPS passive is now that when you shoot someone, or deal any kind of damage using any kind of method as a DPS, that target takes 20% less healing for the next 2 seconds. So essentially, you have partial anti-heal on all of your attacks as a DPS. There are some people who have been fearmongering about this change, and personally, I really don't get behind it. Especially the kind of people who say, lol, Overwatch is dead because they're turning into Paladins, because this is clearly copying the Cauterise mechanic from Paladins. In fact, that's why I suggested it. because I think the Cauterise mechanic in Paladins is actually one of the best things Paladins has going for it. And so I think it's kind of dumb to use it as like a derogatory thing to say like, man, Overwatch is becoming Paladins, because the problem with Paladins isn't Cauterise. The problem with Paladins is everything else. No hate, Paladins players. I do like the game, just, I mean, you know, you're in hot water just as much as we are. But yeah, this is an amazing change because genuinely the root of 99% of the reasons why Overwatch 2 isn't fun is the fact that healing outpaces damage, and so you get these extremely unfun fights where the only way to win is to either wait for the supports to run out of buttons to press, at which point you didn't win because you were better, you won because the supports ran out of buttons, or to just burst kill people and not even give them a chance to play the video game. However, now you can actually cut through mid-fight healing. You actually have a chance to maybe kill someone despite the fact they're being healed. And I do think that's very fair still, considering not only is it only a 20% reduction, it's not like full anti-heal, but on top of that, you still can get full healing out of combat, and to be honest, I think that's how it should be. I don't really think that mid-combat healing is a healthy thing for the game. I think in small doses it's fine when you want to go for ult combos or whatever and you want to make sure the person who's using their ult doesn't die mid-ult. But I think generally it's not exactly skill testing fun or fair to contrive a situation where you have an Orisa that's hard-pocketed by an Ana to make her basically unkillable, and the only time you ever get her low, Akiri just teleports through 10 sets of walls and throws a Suzu on her and she's right back to full health the second the invincibility frames are over. That doesn't really sound like very fun or fair gameplay, and that's a result of mid-combat healing. Whereas now when you do that, don't get me wrong, it's still pretty oppressive, but if you actually have a team comp that can focus fire enough and do enough damage, you can cut through that. I really do think this change is going to revolutionize the game. There's only one issue. When I proposed the idea, I wanted everyone to have this, not just the DPS. And I understand it makes sense for it to be the DPS passive, but can you understand why I have concerns? Because if only the DPS are allowed to do this, and it's so integral to the game, like, you can't kill anyone who's hard-pocketed if you don't have this passive, then naturally won't it just tip the scales way too hard in the DPS's favor if something that really should be a fundamental mechanic of the game everyone has access to is something exclusive to the DPS role? That being said, I can't complain too much. I never even in my dreams ever imagined they'd ever actually add this mechanic to the game, despite the fact I knew that it would do it so much good. So I can't really complain too much. The only things that I'm really unhappy with is, again, the fact that only DPS have it, and the other thing is, I'm not a fan of the numbers. I like what it does, but the numbers seem a bit weird to me. You see, again, the mechanic that it's taken from, Cauterise from Paladins. In Paladins, Cauterise is a more significant effect that applies for a shorter amount of time, but it's the same reduced healing on all shots for all characters, DPS or not. Now, in fairness, there is an issue with Paladins Cauterise in my opinion, and that is that in Paladins, Cauterise scales over time depending on how long the match has been going on, where at the start of the match it's only a 10% anti-heal, but by the end it's a 90% anti-heal. I'm personally not a fan of that because it means that supports are stupid broken at the start of a match and absolutely useless by the end of a match. However, I do think they should still take a page out of Paladin's book here, and I think they should make the anti-heal more significant, but for a much shorter period of time. 2 seconds is a really long time to be playing anti-heal for. I don't know what you might be thinking. Wait, doesn't Ananade do it for 3? 2 doesn't sound like a very long amount of time. But here's the thing. Ananade is an ability that can only be used every 12 seconds. The DPS passive is a passive. It's always there, and all you have to do to activate it is breathe on your opponent. And every single time you even do a single, or not even a single point of damage, you can literally do 0.1 damage to them, and you'll reset that timer. So essentially, it's not just when you're getting shot at, you're going to receive less healing. It's even when the DPS shooting you has to stop to reload, you're still going to receive less healing, and by the time they've reloaded and started shooting again, you still will be receiving less healing, and they'll refresh the timer, so you'll never have a window to get full healing. Not unless you completely escape the fight, and then hide behind cover for 2 full seconds. Personally, I would prefer, as I say, the anti-heal to be far more noticeable and far more powerful, but for it to be extremely short-lived. We're talking half a second or less, so that the second the DPS has to stop to reload, you almost certainly get a brief window of being able to receive full heals again. As I say, the current numbers are 20% for 2 seconds. I would prefer to see 30 or 40% for half a second. In fact, I'm not going to lie, I was going to say 50% for half a second at first, But, well, I played with it now, and it's one of those things where the first few games, you don't feel it too much. Though you do know that something's different. You just don't know how much it matters, really. And then you play a few more games, and you're like, actually, I can kind of feel it. It's making an impact. And then you play a few more games, and you're like, wait, actually, this is really changing the game. And you play a few more, and you start to realize, wow, this is actually just the most broken passive in the game now, isn't it? Again, it's literally only 20%, but that 20% change has really made it so that DPSs can just destroy tanks now. So yeah, I know this is very long-winded, but this passive is especially good with dive DPS, and that's the last piece of the puzzle for why I don't think dive DPS are dead thanks to the health change. Because the DPS passive they get at the same time is especially good on them. Considering how sprayy their weapons are, for lack of a better word, it is basically impossible to not be permanently anti-healed while there is a dive DPS chasing you. And considering that dive DPS are pretty aggressive and very hard to escape, that's going to be pretty scary, constantly being anti-healed while you've got a tracer on your ass that can outrun you 5 times over, constantly spraying bullets in your face. Hell, they don't even have to get close. Even if you're 50 miles away on, like, Widow, and, like, you get there's a Sombra that, like, you briefly catch sight of, but before you can shoot her, she just sprays some bullets in your direction and leaves. Like, yeah, she's not going to kill you. She's probably going to do literally less than 1 damage to you. But hey, that will anti-heal you a little, and if there's someone else who's about to get on you, you might then be anti-healed for the beginning of that fight. Don't get me wrong, there are bad consequences to the addition of this passive, but they are really teething problems. In fact, how about I just stop sugarcoating it and get right into the biggest complaint probably with the new changes? Tank is dead this season. Not only because of the new DPS passive really hurting them, but also because, well, it turned out the character that won the biggest off of all these changes is also notoriously a tank-deleting character, but we'll get to them in a second. Either way, I could see some people who are tank mains complaining about the state of the game right now and saying that this passive was a mistake. But let me just pose this argument to you. First of all, as most of you know, tank is my second most played role, very close second to support, so I obviously play a hell of a lot of tank myself. And essentially the reason why I'm a huge advocate for this DPS passive is that for as much as tank is getting bullied right now, I don't think it's because tank cannot exist in a game where the DPS passive exists. I think it's because tanks have been designed with the DPS passive not existing in mind for years now. They've been designed with the knowledge that there is no way to resolve a stalemate where there's just 2 tanks getting pumped with 10,000 heals per second that are both unkillable and stare at each other all game, and if they ever try and make a play, the other one explodes, so all that they can really do is just stand there and stare at each other and have a bit of a staring contest. I think probably a huge reason why tank was more fun than it has ever been in Overwatch's history at the start of Overwatch 2, and yet since the beginning of Overwatch 2 has done nothing but get kicked into the dirt every passing season. I think a big reason for that is that simply having a huge health bar character that kills people if they get up close, that just gets shit tons of healing, is really, really oppressive. And because that alone is oppressive, they just have to keep taking away the things that tank has. They have to take away Sigma's one-shot combo with rock and orbs. They have to take away Doomfist's movement tech. They have to take away your agency further and further and force you into winning by just being an enormous stat stick that stands there rather than by being good at the game. And if you don't believe me, think about how many times Orisa has been prevalent over the past few months. And then of course one of the brief periods we didn't have Orisa meta was the beginning of Season 8, where instead we had Mauga meta. Again, Orisa 2.0 as I call him. So while for right now things are awful because you kind of lost the ability to actually tank as a tank, if this is followed up with buffs across the board to almost every tank in the game, especially if those buffs are focused on their range, mobility, and damage rather than their health pools and their damage negation, then you could be going into a game in which, because of the DPS passive, you're less reliant on your supports and getting healed to be an effective tank, and you're more able to demonstrate your own skill as a tank rather than have to be held on a leash by an Ana. And I mean, wouldn't that be better for everyone? So yeah, that's I guess my case for the DPS passive, despite how harmful it is right now to tanks. I must admit, even as someone who is very familiar with all the absolute bullshit that tank has to put up with more than any other role, I thought people were being a little melodramatic at first when they were saying tank was dead before the season even dropped, but yeah, I must admit, they're kind of right. Right now, tanks really have basically no impact on the game unless the tank pick you've gone with is someone that enables your DPS or shuts down an enemy DPS. Because right now, with the DPS passive being so powerful, DPS run the game, and almost every single game ends in a DPS diff. Though I will say this, at the very least, despite the fact that DPS is my least played role, I'm actually not too upset about this. Like, obviously I don't think it's healthy, and I do think things should shift and DPS shouldn't be this powerful. But I don't mind them having a bit of a season to themselves, considering the last time that DPS felt impactful was Beta 1 of Overwatch 2. And for basically every single moment of the game since Beta 1, DPS has felt like by far the single least impactful role in the game. So hey, I don't mind giving them some time in the sun, although I do hope things, get back in line in a couple months' time. Either way though, we can't even really get into talking about how dominant DPS are right now just yet, because I haven't yet gotten into the one character that's really taken over the game in this meta. And I really want to make it clear. There are a lot of characters that won or lost in this patch with all the global changes, and most of them I think aren't too egregious. There's a couple that are kind of like, ooh, wow, yeah, they're a bit strong, or wow, yeah, they kind of got a bit screwed. But I mean, I don't think any of them are so egregious I would look at the devs and just go, did you even playtest this? Except one. One character who I refuse to believe they played a single test match with this character before releasing this patch. And once again, I get to be smug and tell everyone I told you so. Because that character is Zenyatta. 3.5 months ago, the Season 7 mid-season quote-unquote support nerf patch. The only support buffed that patch was Zenyatta, who went from 200 to 225 HP while also receiving a buff to his Harmony Orb. And do you want to know what I said nearly 4 months ago when that change first went through? I said, we've done this before, what the fuck are you thinking? For those of you who weren't around for it, Beta 1 of Overwatch 2, considering that DPS were absolutely hunting supports, as you might have been able to guess, considering Zen is a glass cannon in design, in the idea being that he is OP in terms of his damage output and Discord Orb just disabling a tank. But hey, he's vulnerable, he can't get away if he gets dived, and he doesn't have like shields or stuns to protect himself. With that being his idea for design, it makes sense in a meta where supports are being hunted down by DPS that can outrun them that Zen did very poorly in the first beta. And because he did so poorly, they decided, well hey, if Zen's getting hunted down by these scary DPS, why don't we try just giving him 25 extra health? Couldn't be that bad, right? I know he's supposed to be a glass cannon, but come on, how bad could 25 extra health on a character that's got a big hitbox that can't run away and can't stun anyone, how bad could it really be? He instantly catapulted himself from worst support in the game to best support in the game instantly in that one patch. Just because they gave him 25 extra health. That is how oppressive Zen is. And that is also why he's inherently a very, very dodgy character to introduce to the game. Not that it's impossible to make him balanced, but you're giving yourself a nightmare for no good reason by making a character like that, which can so easily throw the game out of whack just by giving him 25 extra health. But yeah, they already did that all the way back in the very first beta. And apparently they didn't learn their lesson, because they made the exact same mistake in the Season 7 mid-season. Literally the exact same change of, oh, Zen's doing poorly because he's too easy to pick off. Better increase his HP from 200 to 225. Now in fairness, you might say, but that was ages ago. That was all the way back in Season 7, mid-season. And, well, Zen didn't take over then. If anything, so Zen was probably one of the worst supports in the game at that time. But he wasn't exactly oppressive in Season 8 either. He was nowhere to be seen. What do you mean, like, oh yeah, I told you so? Well, if you go back to that video, it didn't end there. I didn't say, oh, Zen's going to be busted this patch. I said that Zen isn't going to be busted this patch, but he will be busted in a couple months' time. The second we go into a meta where we actually want Discord Orb, where we actually want to play a character like Zen, Zen is going to break this game wide fucking open. I said that in Season 7, during the mid-season, the reason why he won't be meta, necessarily, is because what mattered then as a support more than anything was being unkillable. So long as you could heal other people and not die yourself, you were providing an enormous amount of value, and there was just almost nothing the enemies could do to counter you because of how ridiculously survivable supports were. Especially considering that during that time, tank wasn't very strong. I mean, nothing new there, I guess, technically, but you know what I mean. Tank didn't feel very good, and for the most part, it was essentially you just pick Sigma and you cycle your buttons so you don't explode. So it wouldn't make sense to play Zen during that meta, because again, he's supposed to be a glass cannon. A lot of damage output and the ability to destroy tanks for free just by looking in their general direction, but the downside being you die easier. In a meta where tanks aren't even that threatening anyway and mostly just cycle buttons to not die, and the supports that are most highly valued are the ones that can stay alive the easiest. Zen was kind of the opposite. He countered what you weren't scared of in the first place, and he put you at immense risk by selecting him. But the second you enter a meta where maybe tanks do need to be countered a little bit more, or maybe Zen is a little bit more tanky and a bit more easy to stay alive on, as soon as that happens, things could get a little bit sketchy, couldn't they? And, well, that's exactly what happened. This was already destined to happen already, but that's not even getting into how the global changes to the game disproportionately benefit Zen over every other character. For one, his already enormous orbs just got even bigger hitboxes, so headshotting on Zen is really easy now. For two, the more health a target has, the more value you get by discording them, which is why you always discord the tank. But now everyone's a little bit of a tank. Everyone got more health, so that means that Discord Orb gets more value on every single character in the game. Not to mention, one of the big problems with trying to discord supports or DPS, not saying you should never do it, but you know, you don't usually do it, is not just because the more health they have, the more value you get, but also because the more people who are shooting the discorded target at once, the better. And a lot of the times, if you discord a small target, people simply won't bother to shoot it and will just shoot the easy target, ergo the tank, instead. But now that everyone's bullets are bigger, it's a little bit easier for them to go for these smaller targets, so now there's more merit to discording a DPS or a support, although still the tank is your main target. Essentially, even though Discord didn't get buffed, it really should have received a compensatory nerf, because even if there isn't a patch note saying they buffed Discord Orb, they essentially did buff Discord Orb by giving everyone more health and making shots easier to hit. It just means Discord Orb is going to be amplifying way more damage. It may as well have received a buff to its damage amp, even though it technically didn't. But let's just get to the real terrifying thing here. Zen now has, no joke, 275 HP. 275. To put that in perspective, Zen's current patch health pool is comparable to Torb's pre-patch health pool. Not to mention, did I mention that melee damage got buffed, which means kick damage also got buffed? Yeah, Zen kick does 85 damage now if you discord your target. Yeah, I'm not kidding. If you discord someone and kick them, you do 85 damage to them. Now you might say, hey, but didn't you say earlier that people are taking more shots because bullets are bigger? Well, that is true, but that doesn't really compensate for the extra health Zen has, because already one of Zen's only weaknesses was that he was one of the very few supports in the game who had a very big and easy to shoot, predictably moving hitbox. As a result, while most supports in the game start getting shot a whole lot more in this update because of the fact they're easier to shoot, Zen was already very easy to shoot. He doesn't really get shot a whole lot more, but he still has plus 50 health. So yeah, Zen is essentially just unkillable now so long as you set a decent distance away from the enemies. It takes too much damage to burst kill him, so you have to get into a prolonged fight with him to potentially kill him. And not only is Zen's damage output so oppressive that genuinely I have had full health Winstons jump on me and I have won the 1v1 as Zen just by throwing orbs in their face and kicking them away continuously. But on top of that, so long as you stay at a distance at which people have to use a mobility ability just to engage on you, it basically makes it impossible for them to win, because once you kick them away, they would have to use even more mobility just to get close to you again. I'm pretty sure, like, I've never had more than 2 deaths since the beginning of this patch on Zen in any game I've been in. And it's not even like, oh, I'm such a good Zen player. That's just, wow, I can just sit here and I just don't die. And if anyone comes into my face, I just kick them and they fall over. I really have to hammer this in. I really do think Zen is not just like a normal, like, oh, he's the meta pick this season. I don't think it's just a normal, yeah, he's good right now. He's who you should pick if you're looking to win or whatever. I think it's like, he's not just S tier. He's like S tier right now. He is stupidly over the top OP. And of course, it only makes sense that tank would be suffering as a result. You see, the DPS passive on its own is definitely scary for tanks, but for most tanks, depending on the tank of course, you can deal with it. It's not the worst. But the reason why tank is truly dead this update is because on top of that, you're never just being hit with anti-heal. You're getting hit with anti-heal from the DPS passive and Discord Orb every game, because every single game has a Zen in it. And what happens when you stack 20% anti-heal with a Discord Orb's 25% damage amp? You go right back to exploding is what happens. Generally, the increased health change to everyone has helped most people in no longer dying instantly in fights and making fights feel more fair, and like more happens and you spend more of the game actually interacting rather than hiding behind corners waiting for something to happen. Most characters have felt that this patch, but tank unfortunately still kind of explodes out of nowhere, because while they wouldn't under normal circumstances, when you add Discord on top of the DPS anti-heal, it becomes way too much. You have to understand, with Discord Orb, you're essentially providing a mercy damage boost to your entire team rather than one person at a time, as Zen. The numbers are even very close. Mercy damage boost is a 30% boost, and Discord Orb is a 25% boost, so it's very comparable. If you have your entire team shooting at a Roadhog with a Discord Orb on them, that Roadhog isn't just taking 25% extra damage, well technically he is, but you can think of it like a pentuple mercy damage boost. You can think of it like he's taking 125% extra damage instead, because he's taking 25% extra damage per person shooting him. So yeah, focus fire is really powerful right now, and as scary as that is, the good news is at least this. We have really been sick of the bunkery like kind of games that we've had recently, and I can tell you bunkering down does not work this season, which is a good thing for the game's health. If you try and bunker down, you will get focus fired into oblivion by a Sojourn and a Zen. And so generally it seems like mobility is what's king this update, because it's the only way that you can avoid getting hunted down. And naturally that means that tank generally loses. However, there is a bit of a silver lining here. If mobility is king and tank doesn't have much mobility typically, doesn't that mean that the dive tanks would be the good tanks? And the answer is thankfully, yes. And it's definitely a good thing that that's true, because the dive tanks, once again, tend to be some of the most high skill and extremely fun characters in the game to play, and so it's really good to see that they're doing well this season. I've heard some Doomfist players complaining their character's dead this season, but I'm not gonna lie. I've been playing a lot of Doomfist lately, as you probably know, and I think Doomfist feels even better this season than he did last season. I'm not gonna lie, he feels really good to me right now. I kind of think people are crying a little bit over nothing when it comes to Doomfist. Like, I think you're well within your right to complain about all the movement tech they took from us and all the bugs they introduced to the character, but I don't think you can really say with a straight face that Doomfist is a bad character right now. I mean, sure, maybe if you're plat or below, but if you're a diamond or above and you know how to play Doomfist, he does really, really well. He's just, of course, a very difficult character. It takes a lot of skill to be able to play him to the standard where it actually works. I haven't played much Winston this season yet, but I hear that Winston's actually doing really well, which kind of caught me off guard. I thought that out of the dive tanks, Winston would be doing pretty badly, but still, like, you know, still be good, because all the dive tanks are good, but not really doing as well, but apparently Winston's doing quite well. D.Va as well, which catches me off guard. I must admit, I haven't felt D.Va feeling particularly good, but I hear good things about D.Va at the moment. And there's just one more dive tank on that list. Ball. We'll get to Ball. Just before I move on though, there's something which I've been dying to get to, which I know it's a sudden jump, but I feel like I just can't go any longer without getting this out. I have been able to form some opinions on the current state of the meta, and I have been able to see what other people have been saying and what's been happening at levels of play higher than the level that I play at. But that being said, it has been really hard to formulate an opinion on this season, and that's part of the reason why I'm going to be very late to the punch here. Because, well, don't get me wrong, every season always has that sort of air of, oh, well, it'll take us a few days to figure it out, oh, don't make any judgments too soon. But usually, I feel like I can be pretty close to the mark within only a day or two of a new season coming out. Don't get me wrong, it's not like I'm always right all the time, of course, I'm not trying to make that argument. But I do feel like a lot of the time when a new season starts, even when it's just the first couple days, usually what I predict will happen is pretty close to what ends up happening. And so I'm still pretty confident usually giving my opinion even like on day 1 or 2 of a new update. But season 9 in particular, it's been way too difficult. Not necessarily because, oh, the changes are just too wacky and out there. I mean, that's a contributing factor, but it's not really the main reason. The main reason is honestly because our games have been shit. Okay, so you know how I said the main point of the season was supposed to be the competitive rework? Well, as it turns out, they did a little something that affects you whether you play competitive or not. You see, A lot of people don't like the idea that they've been screwed over by the rank system, and I can sympathize with that. I've been there, man. Back when I played on console as Anna, and literally it was Moth meta, and I didn't want to play Mercy, and I would constantly be stuck on a team of 5 DPS and I'm the only support, I really didn't enjoy being hard stuck silver, and don't get me wrong, maybe I deserved silver. I know I was a lot worse at the game back then, but also, I did feel like I was being kept down a little bit by the fact that I was always the only support on the team, and I wanted to try and make Anna work in a meta where Mercy was like ridiculously overpowered, and I would get flamed every game for not picking Mercy. I think that was 2017, so that was a while ago, but yeah. I've been there and I know how it feels to feel like the rank system screwed you over. But at the end of the day, I don't mind if they do a rank reset. But that's not what they did. They didn't do a rank reset. They did an MMR reset, as in matchmaking rating reset. That's like your hidden stat that you never get to see, but exists, that tracks how good you are at the game, that isn't displayed as a rank, it's just used to put you in matches of people of your skill level. Now, I understand that your MMR ties into the rank you get, and that's likely why they decided to do a full reset even of MMR. But personally, I'm not gonna lie, I really would have liked to have seen just a rank reset and not an MMR reset. At least me personally, because I don't touch competitive and it really ruined my quick play games. Just suddenly, there's just no MMR for everyone. I mean, I know that it's not literally that. It's not literally everyone was put on an even field to begin with. We got a general idea that like lower skill players would be put somewhere around gold and that higher skill players would be put somewhere around diamond, but that everyone would sort of be clamped towards the middle. But obviously, thanks to this MMR reset, that does mean that now you're far more likely to get into games where you could have people like 7 skill divisions like apart from each other in the same game. And again, in most of the games I play in quick play, while I can never actually know what my hidden MMR is, I know that most of the time when I see a player and they've got like some sort of ranked achievement on their profile, it's usually somewhere between Plat or Masters, and sometimes it's Grandmaster. So I think that probably means that I would probably be around Diamond skill level. Obviously I can only speculate, but man, has my confidence in that being true been reinforced by this, because Jesus Christ, the second that MMR reset hit, I felt it. Start of Season 9, my games were awful, frankly. And I'd never seen so many people in my games making just absolute beginner mistakes as if they were brand new to the game. And who knows, maybe they were. Maybe I was genuinely being put in some games with genuinely brand new players because of the MMR reset. Probably the most noticeable one was, of course, the classic. I know it's very overdone, but I mean, sometimes it's true. The support that literally doesn't heal. But I want to make it clear, because I mean, come on, that's a stereotype. And let's be real, there's very, very different kinds of quote-unquote not healing. Because personally, I do think that usually it's pretty understandable if a support can't heal you mid-combat. Don't get me wrong, it's probably better if they do, but generally, if you're getting mad at your supports for not healing you in the middle of a fight, I think that's usually not their fault. Usually, if they can manage it, they'll do it, and if they can't, then, you know, they can't, whatever. I do think that if you're forcing your supports to have to move out of position or do difficult things for the sake of bailing your ass out, then that's on you and not on them. But then there's situations where I've been playing DPS, and I've been playing a whole lot more DPS considering they're much more dominant now, and I'll get into a fight, and I'll realize, okay, I'm in danger, I'm gonna get out. And I'll get out, and I'll get into cover, and there'll be a support standing right there. And I'll say I need healing, and they'll see I'm on critical health, and they will stare directly into my soul as they continue to fire at the Reinhardt who is full HP with their little rifle that does like 2 damage per shot, and continue to ignore me as I stand there like, hello, can you see me? I'm directly in front of your face. I am critical health. I am even standing still to make the shot as easy as possible for you. Please, for the love of God, press the healing button that you have. I can tell you're not reloading. You're firing bullets right now. I can tell you have your abilities because you haven't used a single ability in the last 20 seconds. Never in my life have I had so many situations where I have literally been standing directly still, staring a support in the eye for longer than 3 seconds. And then 3 seconds after I've arrived, they'll suddenly turn around all shocked as if they didn't even know I was there, and then panic heal me like, oh god, wait, you were there the whole time? And it's like, I've been here for 3 whole seconds staring directly at you. How the hell have you not seen me until now? I literally was asking for healing too. And of course, I've had my fair share of tanks who literally, like unironically, just hold W into the entire enemy team, tried to 1v5 and then flame their team. So yeah, I have just felt an absolute nosedive in the quality of games the second this MMR reset hit. Though I will say this, I was very, very pessimistic about how this would go at first. I thought that, yes, of course, everyone's going to get back to the ranks they deserve eventually, but like, man, it's going to take a while. And don't get me wrong, still I get games that are pretty iffy, and I probably will be getting iffy games for a while. But I have to admit, the first week of the season, the games were so awful that like, it genuinely made me not want to play, despite how much new cool stuff was in the game this season. Whereas I can say that certainly so far what little I've played this week has felt a lot better. Still a little bit lower quality than the games I was getting beforehand in terms of how equal the skill distribution is. I still sometimes walk into a game where I have a bunch of teammates that are gold or plat against a Grandmaster Sojourn with a hard mercy pocket who is just rolling the entire lobby. Still, that happens every now and then, but it's certainly a lot more bearable at the moment. So I will say I'm pleasantly surprised. I thought it would be months before this was cleared up, and it does feel like it's at least fixed itself to a reasonable degree in the space of about a week, so I'm hopeful that this won't be a lingering issue that will ruin my enjoyment of a season I should otherwise be very positive about. And hey, at the end of the day, it's not all bad news, because as infuriating as it is when I do have these teammates that are just like clearly not really paying attention, it also means that every now and then I get to have a game where I get to be the main character, you know? And that's always fun. Especially because I've been practicing Genji recently. Already in Season 8, I was trying to pick up Genji because Genji was one of the few dive characters I didn't know how to play yet. And I feel like Season 9 has just been the tipping point where he's finally really clicked with me, because the main barrier for me was the aim, and the bigger projectiles has made Genji a lot more doable for me. And so I've been having a lot of games where, sure, it might be frustrating that I feel like I have to do everything and all that, but at the end of the day, it does also feel really fucking cool just shredding apart an entire lobby solo as Genji. That being said, that's probably only if you're DPS. If you're playing any other role, the MMR reset is probably going to be painful, since as I mentioned, it's a DPS diff 90% of your games now. And even the games where it isn't a DPS diff, it usually kind of is. I mean, I had a game recently during Season 9 where I was playing Zen, and I had a Ramatra on our team, and it was me and the Ramatra who were rolling the lobby, and our DPS actually were the worst players on our team in terms of the stats on the scoreboard and their KDs. But in that particular case, it was less because, oh yeah, we just took over the lobby and we were so dominant and all that, and more because we both conspired to absolutely ruin the enemy Widowmaker's day, who was the main reason we were losing. And it turned out the second we started screwing over that Widowmaker, their whole team fell apart like a house of cards. So even when you have situations where a support or a tank do manage to carry, it's not usually because of what they can provide to the team innately, it's usually because they somehow have the ability to screw over an enemy DPS, which then makes it more likely that you win the fight because they have a DPS that's getting screwed over and it's all about the DPS diff. On a slightly related note, I just wanted to throw this in somewhere. I think this is a reason why Roadhog feels so weird this season. You probably heard a lot of people saying Roadhog is dead, and logically that makes sense. The only way he can tank is self-healing, and now he gets less self-healing while he's getting shot, so obviously he'd be much worse. However, when I first played right at the start of the season, he felt really good actually, and I was kind of amazed. I thought he should feel awful, but he felt amazing the first few games. But then the second I continued to play him the second day onwards, every game felt awful, and I couldn't tell what had changed. And essentially what I realized was that the first day, no one was really playing the strong characters, everyone was just playing whatever, and so I got away with Roadhog a lot more. Whereas the second day, I saw a whole lot more Widow, a whole lot more Sojourn, a whole lot more characters that could just sit on the other side of the map and farm me, and I definitely saw Zen every single game. And yeah, the second that happened, I was useless. But the reason I bring that up is because I think that's another example. Because if they don't have your counters, if they don't have a Zen, I think the reason why Hog felt so good when there isn't a Zen, or there isn't a Widow, or there isn't a Sojourn, is because then the Hog can just walk up to the enemy DPS and delete them from the game. And by doing that, you win the game, because again, all that matters is the DPS diff. But if there's no enemy DPS to diff your DPS, then it's a free DPS diff. But yeah, Hog is only that oppressive if there is no Zen, and no Sojourn, and no Widow, and no Mei, and no Hannah, and you get the point. I don't know why, but that first day I was seeing a lot of Mercy, Moira, and Lifeweaver, so I was getting away with it a lot more. Either way, that's probably long enough talking about this without getting into the DPS that are doing well this patch, in my opinion. Hey, so this video's getting pretty long, huh? Yeah, I hate to say it, but I kind of chopped off the entire ending of this video because it was already getting too long, so I'm just going to have to give a quick summary, although I do think I might make a follow-up video where I go more in depth on this stuff. So first of all, unfortunately, I didn't get back to ball because that was going to come at the end of the video and it's already getting long enough. Second of all, I was also going to bring up, of course, which characters I think have done particularly well besides obviously Zen, who's just an obvious, oh, he's crazy. Which for the most part was going to be Widowmaker, Sojourn, and the dive DPS on the DPS side. On the tank side, I already mentioned it's the dive tanks. And on the supports, aside from Zen, it's been Lucio and Moira. Although I think that Brig is being a little bit underrated at the moment as well. I was going to talk about the Pharah rework, of course, but I'll probably leave that for another video now. I was going to explain why dive DPS have ended up being the kings at the moment that basically rule the game, which I will explain in short. Of course, there's a lot more nuance than this, but at the end of the day, I think that heroes like Sojourn and Soldier ultimately have a better ratio of effort put in to rewards gotten out. But the reason why dive is still dominating regardless is because at the end of the day, while it does take way too much effort to get the same results on dive, and at the end of the day, every game is decided by a DPS diff at this point. So having a higher ceiling is generally better than having an easier, more consistent character. Whereas before, while obviously it's always good to push yourself, you might not have wanted to risk playing Tracer and risk potentially having a bad performance that screws over your team, when you could just pick Mei and guaranteed do alright. When, of course, back in Season 8 and 7 and blah blah blah, DPS weren't really very impactful, so even if you did get that game on Tracer where you popped off, you would only have done a little bit better than you would have done if you just picked Sojourn and gave an average performance. Whereas obviously right now, because the DPS diff is all the game hinges on, of course now it's much more important to just be the better DPS, even if only by a little bit. And dive DPS have the highest ceilings, so they have the most potential to be pushed. But I think it's very important I keep these last two bits intact. I wanted to end this video off with two things. First of all, I wanted to say, for as much as I've got to complain about this update, I also have a lot to celebrate, and I want to make it clear that I do think this is a big step forward. Because before, I felt like we were miles away from the peak Overwatch that I wanted. But now, I think we're genuinely only a few steps away, though I will admit, I don't think they're going to take these steps exactly how I want, because some of them are just too good to be true. I think we are currently only 2 steps away from some near-perfect Overwatch, and 3 steps away from some perfect Overwatch. Step 1 is nerf Zen, obviously, and that one I think is pretty realistic. Step 2 is, okay, even once you nerf Zen, tank is going to need some help. So across the board buffs for tanks, especially focused on their damage, mobility, and range over their survivability, so that they actually have impact on a game despite not having the DPS passive. That one isn't too hard in theory, but in practice I have doubts the devs will actually follow through with it, even though it's a good change. And as I say, they could do just those first 2 steps and already I think they would have massively improved the game and it would already be near peak Overwatch. And then they only have to take one more step to get there. And I think the big difference between this season and previous seasons is before this step, like the game couldn't have even been good without this step being made. Whereas now, thanks to the DPS passive, the game can still be fine even if they don't take the step, though I still think it would be better than not for them to take the step. And that is, as I've kept calling for them to shuffle the power from supports away from survivability and into more skill-based abilities. Again, the game is always unfun when supports are unkillable, and while that's not necessarily a constant of the universe anymore, because now you can at least cut through their healing a bit, so even if supports are unkillable, you can still do something to play the game. Still, obviously the game is at its most healthy when supports aren't just impenetrable fortresses just by virtue of having buttons available. And as bad as that sounds, that's 3 steps. 3 steps which all shouldn't be too hard to do in theory, it's just doing it. You know, and 3 steps is certainly a lot closer than we've been in a long time to peak Overwatch. The second point is to look back at a prediction I made. As I mentioned in some previous videos, I predicted in Season 7 that Season 6 was the beginning of a dark age for Overwatch that wasn't going to end anytime soon, and that prediction mostly seemed to have panned out considering what came directly after was Season 8. And for the sake of not being verbose, I won't explain why, but there was a reason I picked these numbers, but I made a prediction on when things would get better. I predicted they would realize they had a problem that wasn't just characters being overpowered or underpowered, but a fundamental problem with the gameplay loop by Season 8 mid-season. I predicted that by Season 9, that would be their first attempt at fixing the game. And as a result, Season 9, they'd be making an effort to fix the problems they created through damage and healing power creep, but they wouldn't quite hit the mark because it was their first attempt. So I thought it was possible Season 9 could get us out of the Dark Ages, but I didn't think it really would be the end of the Dark Ages. I expected a sensible prediction would be that Season 10 would be the season by which the game finally gets better. I predicted all of this back in Season 7, And so far, it seems to be panning out quite well. The main thing I was worried about is the only part of this prediction that didn't come true was them realizing they had a problem by the Season 8 mid-season, which was one of the biggest reasons why that patch got me so down. Because overall, that was a very pessimistic prediction, and the only optimistic part was believing they'd see they had a problem by Season 8, and yet by Season 8, they didn't see they had a problem, and so that got me really worried that the only part of the prediction that was at all optimistic was the only part that I got wrong. However, it seems I wasn't far off. In fact, it might have even been true that they realized they had a problem but just put it off till the start of Season 9 to fix, considering kind of both things happened at once at the start of Season 9, that they realized they had a problem and did something about it. And honestly, we're still even seeing how this initial patch plays out. Again, that prediction predicted that, well, their first attempt at making a patch in Season 9 to fix their damage and heal power creep problems getting out of control. I predicted that their first attempt at it wouldn't go that well, and it would take a couple patches before they figure out what they're doing. But honestly, to be fair, this first attempt has done better than I thought. I'm not saying that it's literally, it's already perfect. I don't think so, but I gotta say, we're closer than I thought we would be by the first attempt for such a monumental change to the pace of the game. So yeah, as much as I've got things to complain about this season, I do want to say overall, this season is reinvigorating a lot of my hope. The Season 8 mid-season was almost the tipping point. It was really the point where I was like, oh god, is this game really just going to lose everything it earned? Is it really all going to fall apart just when we were on the road to recovery? But I gotta say now, I see all the positive things about my predictions finally starting to come true, and now I really can believe that by Season 10 we're going to have a really good meta, because I feel like we're already pretty close to it right now as I speak. And as if we didn't need more positive reinforcement, one last thing. Because I took way too long to get around to making this video, the devs have already released a hotfix for this patch, which is not only a relatively fast response, but the hotfix changes are generally pretty good. Most of the changes are reducing the size of certain bullets that were a little bit fucking ridiculous, like Widowmaker in this patch, so I'm not going to go over all of them, but the main ones that stick out to me is of course the Zenyatta nerfs, which is 25 less health, as it should have been, and his kick now has finally had its knockback reduced by 25%, because if you didn't know, until this update, Zen's kick was stronger than Lucio Boop. Yeah, I think that was fucking psychotic that they ever thought it'd be okay to make Zen's kick a passive ability that is always there on a character that's supposed to be vulnerable to dive characters be stronger than Lucio Boop, a cooldown which is weaker on a character who is defined by their boop and isn't supposed to be super vulnerable. Either way, kick knockback being less strong means Zen's more susceptible to dive, and him having less health, I must admit, I do read 25 health less, and I think that's not enough as a gut feeling, but I mean, I was just talking about how much giving him 25 more broke the game wide open, so while it doesn't intuitively feel like 25 is a lot, I wouldn't be surprised if this 25 health reduction does a lot to fix Zen. I guess the only concerning thing is no nerfs to Discord Orb, but I guess that makes sense because Discord Orb's kind of one of those abilities where you're going to be nerfing it forever unless you finally decide to rework it. The other one I find notable is that shockingly, while Roadhog only got one buff, it was a pretty fucking huge one. That being that Roadhog now takes half damage while using Take a Breather. That was already true a while ago, but when they reworked Roadhog, they reduced the damage reduction by 10% to compensate for the fact he could heal at any time now and heal more. And remember how reworked Roadhog was awful at first, but then very quickly got fixed? When he was awful, his damage resistance was 30%, not 40%. So we've already seen how much just 10% extra damage resistance can do, so I won't be surprised if this one buff is actually fucking humongous. And it genuinely leaves me wondering if Roadhog could be good now. I haven't played Roadhog since this hotfix, since it was very recent. Obviously, it doesn't change the fact he's still going to be eating a lot of Discord Orbs and he's still going to be having to deal with the DPS passive anti-healing him, but man, 50% damage reduction on command with self-heal is pretty fucking powerful. I mean, that's more damage reduction than Orisa Fortify. So yeah, I'm certainly feeling a lot more hopeful for the game, and I'm really looking forward to Season 10. I've actually been saving credits so that I can get the Season 10 Battle Pass without spending any money as soon as it drops, and I'm definitely going to be playing Venture day one when the next season drops. With all that said, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.